Richard Bliss Brooke here. We are live.
You sit here today with none other than
Mark Victor Hansen,
Bob Proctor.
This is Kendra Hall.
Sonia Stringer.
Jack Canfield.
DeWitt Jones.
James Clear.
Les Brown. People want to hear stories. I like getting stories out of my guests here, so thanks for joining us.
Hey everybody, Richard Bliss Brooke here with another episode of The Authentic Networker, and we're going to do a deep dive today in the history of personal development. We have none other than one of the most famous, most prolific personal development coaches, trainers, and philosophers in the world, Mr. Don Hobbs from Puerto Rico. Say hello, Don.
Hey, Richard. It's so good to be here.
I appreciate so much your time. I know you are a busy guy. You got a lot going on right now with Success Magazine. We'll get to that. But I wanted to introduce you to my group, my tribe, Don, because you're such an integral part of the history of the personal development movement for people in sales, entrepreneurs, business people, anybody that realizes that in order for them to achieve more, they've got to be more. And so I just appreciate you investing some time, telling some stories. I'm going to ask you to tell some stories about your history, your journey, where you came from, what have you been doing, what are you doing now? And I think people will get great inspiration from that.
Happy to do it, and I'm excited for the opportunity, and I always love touching the lives of anybody that we can, and I love your show for doing that.
Yeah, thank you, Don. So let's start here, because I think, you know, one of the fascinating things about your history, which people are going to want to know, wow, how did you pull that off? Is you started your personal development journey at the age of 18 with Jim Rohn Production, or Jim Rohn International. I can't remember the name of his company back then. Yeah. And you became his #1 producer. And I'm going to stop the question there and then move on to what happened after that. But I want to know, who was Don Hobbs? Where were you? What were you doing? What were you thinking that had you end up with Jim Rohn as one of his ambassadors?
Well, picture this, first of all. That's awesome. Thank you. So picture this. It's date night. I think it was a Saturday night. It was either Friday or Saturday. I remember it was date night. And I'm like not wanting to go. And my mom, I didn't live at home. I actually had already bought my first home. And she calls me and said, I went to this guy's seminar, this Jim Rohn, and he reminds me a lot of you, which I thought, now I look back and I think that's really funny that he reminded, he reminded her of me. And so anyway, she bought me this ticket for the seminar. I'm like, seminar? What do I want to go to a seminar for? I can't understand why I'd be going to a seminar and why you paid this money. And by the way, $35. So it was not a lot of money, but of course, $35 in 1976 was different than it is today. And I went and spent the time. And I remember not wanting to be there, but walking in. I'll tell you where I came from, but I walked in to the West and South Coast Plaza. I'm sure you have been there numerous times. And chandeliers, and I'm from El Monte, California, Southern California, Los Angeles area. Nothing wrong with El Monte, but it was it wasn't the other side of the tracks. It was right on the tracks. It was right there. And I never experienced anything like this. I'm like, wow. And then I'm looking around, all these people are dressed up in suits and looking good, and executives, and I'm thinking, what am I doing here? Rohn opened his mouth, and when Jim started talking, I was just, it didn't take me but 10, 15 minutes, and I was scribbling through. My mom used to be in a corporation. She had these stenographers' notebooks. If you remember even what that is, most of your viewers probably don't have a clue. And I started writing notes, and by the time I was done, I had 19 pages. But I remember it was about 15 to 20 minutes in, and I'm like, wow, I want to do that. And funny, at the first break, I ran right up to him and got in line, and I said, I love this, and I'm gonna be like you. I want to do this in the world, right? And I'm sure he's like looking at me. I'm in I don't know what I was dressed like, but I know I was not in a suit. I wasn't dressed up, and I'm sure he thought, okay, little boy, go away and whatever. Although that was not Jim's style to dismiss somebody, but he was encouraging, And I ended up buying everything they had. And, you know, Jim Rohn, actually we had Adventures in Achievement at the time was the current name of it at that point. And I bought everything. I spent, you know, $1,000 on a weekend with him, and I spent money on the tape sets and cassette tape sets, and went through all that stuff for a long time. And probably 3 months into it, I went to his leadership weekend, and I walked up to him, 50 people in Jim Rohn, right? And I walked up to him and said, I want to work for you. How do I do that? And so it worked out pretty well. And it wasn't, you know, I didn't have instant success by any stretch of the imagination. It was a train wreck. All I sold was my furniture. I didn't sell much furniture, but I sold gold and guns and anything that I could dump to try and survive. And that was the beginning of my personal development. But
all right, well, we got to go back because you skipped over something that I think people are going to want to know about. So you were 18, you already owned a home. You just slipped up and said you owned guns and gold by the time you were 18 and a home, and you weren't living at home. So back up a bit, Don, because you didn't just trip and fall on your head and move out and own a home at 18. What happened?
I had a strange childhood or strange early day work deal. You know how sliding doors or the forks in the road? My fork in the road, my first job, I was put into a pro shop for a trap and skeet shooting range. So I don't know if, yeah, exactly. Well, I was a professional trap shooter. I was very good at that at an early age, and had that in my background. And so when I went to get a job, I was either going to be a busboy, which is, they called me and said, yes, you're in. And the other job they called me for that day was at the trap and skeet range. And the manager said, we've known you for years. You're way too good to be, you know, what they called a trap boy, you know, one of the people pushing the button and all that. And he said, I want you to be the pro in the pro shop. And so at 16, I got that job, and it paid pretty well. And so I was making big bucks, had new cars, and, you know, the girls really voted me most likely to succeed.
Working in a trap and skeet club. And I actually know what that is because my dad was a professional trap and pigeon shooter when I was a kid. So I grew up.
Clay pigeons.
I grew up in the trap clubs. Yeah, clay pigeons. He actually shot live pigeons too as a sport.
Yep.
Crazy.
Yep.
So, wow, that's pretty
funny.
interesting. And so you get started with Jim Rohn, and I just loved on the, well, you know what, let's dive into it because I think it's such a great distinction. So here you are sitting in a seminar, you're inspired. The first break or whenever the thing's over, you run up to the front of the room and tell Jim Rohn what you tell him, which, you know, now with hindsight and experience, you have to ask yourself, how many young kids ran to the front of the room and told Jim Rohn that they want to do what he does in his career, right? So many of them. But that's a powerful distinction that you had, you know, it's what I call a green light vision or decision where you have something in your mind you want to do, and boom, you just go do it without doubt, without worry, without thinking about what if he doesn't like me, what if he says no, right? You're just all of a sudden up in front of the room telling him you want to go to work for him. What do you attribute that courage to?
I was fired. I actually don't know. I can't tell you where the confidence came from. And I certainly was an athlete, so I built up some of that. You know, I mean, I think there was some parts in school. You know, obviously I didn't go on to college. I knew I wasn't going to. You know, it's funny because when I think back, Jim Rohn said something, standard education gets you standard results, self-education will get you incredible results, or something in that vein, right? It depends on which night he said it. But I remember, and I don't even know that that's when I made the decision. I think I'd already decided I wasn't going to school and I wasn't going the traditional path, and I was a good student and all that. But there was something about what I saw, and I got connected to touching these people, like this room full of folks, and watching his magic, which was absolute. I mean, he was magic in the way he, you know, shared. And I wanted to do that. What baffles me is how I thought I could do it. And you know, that's the part where you go, what are you thinking, right? How's that going to happen? And then when I went to work for him, there was some, funny things about that. Like I didn't have a suit. I didn't know how to, that was the days of three-piece suits, Richard. This was not Hawaiian shirt and casual open, cuffs folded back and all that. It wasn't that time frame, right? It was a different era. And I remember, it's funny now that I'm the age I am and thinking about how much we love the idea of being younger and how much at that time I wanted to be older. And I used to put little powder in my baby powder in my hair to get a little gray so people would think I was older, which must have looked hysterical. And it's just funny stuff, just hysterical to think about the mindset of that kid that was walking up and doing that.
Well, your parents gifted you with some great early confidence for you to perform so well that somebody wanted you to run a business at the age of 16, and for you to have the confidence to buy a home and make investments and then pivot into, something you didn't know anything about. So tell us about the early months or years selling for Jim Rohn and how you struggled, and then the point, if you can nail it, of breakthrough. What did you struggle with? And what created the breakthrough? Because you ended up being his number one salesperson, correct?
Yeah. So we, again, which month and which year, right? And by the way, shall we say that 3 months, 4 months after I started, Tony Robbins came along? So, you probably know that, but this big gawky kid came walking in and, we started doing all of our meetings together. Eventually, he ran LA for the company. I ran Orange County for the company. And then another year and a half after that, he ran off to go do, I don't know, some small thing that he's been doing for a while. And then I went off to become Jim's president. But the early days were different because I was not good at sales. I did not have a clue. I remember a friend of mine joking with me, but I think he was relatively serious. He was trying to be kind. And he said, we can see your potential. And I said, well, thank you. He said, it just kind of means you haven't done anything yet. It's like you just, he was being sweet and at the same time kicking my butt. But I remember saying that I really had to sell, gold chains. At the time, it was something that was kind of cool. And we had gold chains and things like that. And I had a gun collection because that's what I was in the business of. And so for me to start liquidating to survive, because, most businesses are not instantaneous successes. And I was definitely not an instant, overnight success by any stretch. So I'm 18, 19, still struggling, getting better, starting to feel what it's like. You used to have the first experiences and you start having great days, all of a sudden a great day, and you go, wow, if I had a great day, what would happen if I strung those together? And then finally, I think I was 20 or between my 20th and, so I'm a June baby, I think between turning 20 and 21, somewhere in there, I made $100,000. So it really did shift. And by the way, a lot of people will say even today, I just want to make six figures. 6 figures in 1980, whatever it was, or 79 was a little different, right?
Big money, yeah.
Bucks. Yeah. So, but it was, and by the way, I'll give you a lesson. I'll give you a great lesson. We can come back, but let me give you this because Jim said something to me. We were doing an awards, monthly awards deal. And I had just had this understanding that I hit $100,000 and they were all like, and I remember him saying to me, Donald, that's awesome. I'm proud of you. Now figure out how to do that in less time. Now that you've figured out how to do that, do it in less time. And that was a great time management lesson, which of course we may want to chat about at some point. But that was to me some of the lessons of being around Rohn. It was like he just always kept you thinking bigger and knowing who you were and seeing a bigger potential for yourself.
So it's interesting to me, Don, that Jim said instead of trying to figure out how to earn more money, he said, figure out how to earn the same $100,000 in a shorter period of time. That's paradigm shifting, insightful coaching. What do you attribute that distinction to? And how did you go about doing it?
Oh, wow. Okay. Good question. I don't know if I've ever had that asked. First of all, his insights were like that. I mean, Jim was a journaling. I mean, I loved when finally his kind of official title became America's foremost business philosopher, because while he wasn't a great businessman, he was a great understander of the world of business. And I think he understood, of course, that, that time is the differentiator between success and failure. I mean, attitude, clearly there's other factors, but he understood that, that in our world, Bill Gates has the same amount of time as you and me, and the same amount of time as anybody else that's listening, right? That it is a factor of how do we compress time. And he kind of continued to influence that compressing time. How do you do that? Today we do it with a lot of technology. Then it was more just being efficient at planning and structure and some of that stuff that we could do. But regardless, we do know, and I kind of got it early on, that time is the big, Warren Buffett said something about, the difference between the successful and the super successful. The super successful say no to almost everything. So there's a lot of things we can learn. And, I think Rohn kind of understood some of that, how he kept focused on things that really mattered, which made not only his success happen, but also his lifestyle, his enjoyment, his fulfillment, that he had time for the things that he really enjoyed. So,
Right.
Yeah. And then you asked me a second part, which is, how did I do that? I don't know.
You went from that $100,000 to becoming the president of Jim Rohn International. How did you do that? How did you parlay that success of $100,000 to get in a position to run his whole company?
Well, we were beginning to run regions, if you will, and I was the Orange County region. And so we, began to make some pretty darn good money because we were building programs and doing that stuff. And then, it kind of, and I laugh at this, and I'm not sure it's totally true, and he's not here to verify it, but I always say I was the last man standing. He'd gone through a couple presidents, and he looked around and went, you're left. So, and some of that's true, and some of that is that, we were doing some good things together, and we were very successful in our region. We were running a pretty good sized sales staff. I think I had about 250 salespeople. So we were doing some good things, but Tony was doing some good things, and a few other people were doing some good things. You may not know this, but we had a core of people. In fact, I think Mark Hughes went on to do Herbalife. I'm not sure he was there, but Larry Thompson was kind of in the neighborhood, and there were a lot of people that were around us. We had a very interesting core of people that pushed each other. And so I think, in the end, I was last man standing. That's probably the safest move.
Yeah. Well, you and I didn't actually meet, Don, until Jim's memorial service. And although I was on a parallel path about the same time, exactly the same time as all of you, I didn't know any of you, and I didn't even know Jim Rohn in my early years. Right. And you guys really created something that has gone on with the work that you've done, which we're going to get into, the work that Tony's done, the work that Herbalife has done. Larry Thompson continues to do work. Sometimes magic happens when the right people get around each other and just sort of create and fail and bump into each other and hit roadblocks. And you guys created a lot of magic back then. That's something to really hang on to as precious history, because millions of lives have changed since then. So you went from Jim Rohn Productions to Hobbs Herder Advertising, and then you hooked up with another fascinating individual after years of success at Hobbs Herder. You hooked up with Gary Keller and what he was doing, which is some really fascinating training. Tell us about that.
Well, so Hobbs Herder was in the real estate space, and I got a chance to be the first speaker in his first convention. They now call them family reunions. At the time, it was called a convention. And I spoke for his first convention. Gary ultimately built that company to be 170,000 agents. And when I spoke from the first time, there was 350. So it was very early on in his development. And we had a very similar philosophy, because Hobbs Herder was based on something which was personal marketing, personal branding. And we came along and said, in the real estate space, it's not about the gold jacket with Century 21 or the powder blue jacket with ERA. If I don't call and ask for Richard by name, if I don't think of you as my realtor and I call your company, you could be with the number one company and broke, and so it doesn't help. And Gary got that. He understood it. He goes, that makes sense to me. And so we became close friends. And so for years we were pals, and I spoke for his company many times, and we went fly fishing and goofed off together. A good guy, really good guy. And we had a lot of years. And finally, when he was writing the One Thing book, and it was his first book, not in real estate, and it was his first business book. And he said, it's going to open up a whole new can of worms and a whole new opportunity. He said, move here to Austin and leave everything you've ever done in California and come and join me. So, when a billionaire calls you and says, come in, let's do something together, I was like, okay, if I have to. And so we made that work together for a few years. That was amazing. And, the training that company does is considered amongst the best in the industry. And it was, again, it's interesting. You said that about the special times at Jim Rohn. I've actually likened that and said it was in my world, even as I was in it, I recognized it was a unique time. And I refer to it as Camelot. You find that it's that Camelot moment.
Yep.
And there was a moment in the Keller world where that happened, and I never thought it would. And there was a moment at Hobbs Herder when I remember like the elite of the elite moment. Oh my gosh, we're there again. And I feel like I'm doing it for my fourth time. So I feel like, I've been very, very fortunate, but that era was a great era for me. And hanging around with Gary's a big thinker. And, you probably know this, Richard, but if you look at results, we think it's about skills, and we think it's about how much time we invest, and I'm working hard, and the reality is it's really about the level of our thinking that allows us to have goals and realize that the time to work, mediocrely, if that's a word, and the time to work hard and the time to work smart is all the same time. And so I really got that from that experience, that you could either think big or think small, and it was going to totally turn out differently.
Yeah. So you went all over the world teaching the MAPS program, the One Thing with Gary Keller. I read somewhere you've talked to over 1 million realtors. That's hard to do. That's a lot of impact for a profession that really always can use, that kind of coaching and inspiration. So now you're doing something else, Don. So tell us what you're doing now, because you're still impacting real estate. That's your chosen niche of the people that you see you can have the biggest impact with. Tell us what you're doing with EXP.
Well, EXP is, it's a real estate company many people aren't familiar with, yet it's the fastest growing real estate company in the history of real estate. And again, unless you're in an area where it's already blossomed and grown, it's in all 50 states and all of that. But it's really pushing the industry completely. And Glenn Sanford, the founder of the company, he's an innovator. I mean, we look for out of the box thinking. There's the box. Where's Glenn? He's way over there. He just doesn't get box thinking, and everything for him is pushing limits. And so he built a company virtually, a virtual platform. And a lot of people don't get this, but it's a real estate company with no bricks and mortar. I mean, corporate office has no bricks and mortar. And we've done it on a platform that's a gaming platform, like you'd play a game, only I walk into the corporate office, or I walk into accounting, or I walk into whatever. And we started building this when I was with Gary's company. The love of my life, I was so busy trying to get her in my world, and we were friends, and we laugh now about the 150 first dates that we had to go through to get her to finally wake up and go, oh, there you are, I love you. But when we finally got together, she had left Keller Williams and gone to EXP. I was Gary Keller's partner, and we ended up living together, and here we are in the same household. I'm Gary Keller's partner, and she's with this company that's kind of tearing that one apart. And I mean, I don't mean in that a vicious way. I mean, just from a competitive standpoint. And so it was fiery. I mean, it was fiery. And then, but Glenn's vision is that, you know, when things went down in 2008, 9, and 10, Richard, and you saw this in business, you were, you know, you're very much in that time frame of, I'm sure it impacted you, that business was struggling, and, you know, people went through economic downturns in a major way. And he said, you know, all those real estate companies didn't have to go out of business. They had so much overhead, they were stuck with that fixed cost. And with today, you know, everything running off of a cell phone or an iPad or, you know, numerous technologies, my phone, my watch, you know, it's like all of that. We didn't need that stuff. And so he built a company that didn't require it. So we're having a lot of fun with that. It's the most amazing experience where we've taken a publicly traded company and given people stock ownership. And so we're doing that. And Glenn had the chance to take Success Magazine, and you know, we all of us, of course, we have known the owners and all of that. And he said, boy, we want to put it in capable hands. Somebody's going to steward it. And Glenn called me and said, you know, man, if you are interested in this, I'm interested in doing it with you. And, you know, you've got the personal development background. And of course, full circle for me, when Jim was passing, all of his library got sold to Success. And so here I am all these years later, coming back to all this Jim Rohn material, which is some of it I filmed, you know, it was one of our projects back in the day. So it's very exciting to see what's going on there.
Yeah, I love the full circle of this. Success, I have a lot of history with Success Magazine. Just been the most important magazine in the history of, as a magazine, in the history of my development and career. And I think it's just an extraordinary thing that you guys are now going to be the stewards of it, because it really needs, it needs to be honored in that way. And I'm really excited to see what you guys do to, you know, make it extraordinary. It's already a great magazine and has been for, what, 120 years. But what you guys will do with it will be reinventing the extraordinary. And that's exciting. So, Don, recap your career. I mean, you know, we could have spent hours diving into your career. Your career in personal development and real estate coaching and training and partnering with some of the most successful, creative, impactful people in the world of personal development and real estate is phenomenal. Boil all that down for us into, well, I'll ask this question. What's the biggest mistake you've made in the last 45 years? Maybe it's a bad habit that you kept, like death of a thousand cuts, and maybe it was just a really big blunder. What's the biggest mistake you've made in your career?
Well, I hate to say it, but I brought up the 2008 through 10 because I had stepped out of the business world and was retired for 2 years. I was feeding hummingbirds and taking naps and really enjoying life, and thought I was done. And then 2008, and I thought, okay, well, I've got plenty to make this last, and just didn't make some of the smart moves. And by the time 2010 came, it was longer than we said. We were already predicting it. We'd told all of our realtor clients, be aware, you know, it's going to be long, it's going to be hard. But, you know, I guess I didn't have it. And in the end, lost a lot, if not all, of my major wealth that I had built. And so that was hard. And I would say, you know, I learned a few lessons about the way you protect corporations can be set up to protect some of that. And also just, you know, downsize if you're in business and you're watching this, you know, downsize if the first hint of downturn, you know, get ahead of that, be smart. But I think the biggest thing was then I began to doubt myself. And that was probably the biggest, really big downturn, Richard, was I'd taken some time off. And of course, you just imagine taking a vacation, coming back from a 3-week vacation, how hard it is to kind of get back in the grind, as they say. And imagine 2 years and then going, oh my gosh, I've got to wake up and redo this and really get, you know, aggressive and go. And it was hard. My habits had fallen off, and some of my business skills. I mean, and a lot changed. And, you know, things change fast these days, right? And a lot changed. So, you know, there were people that weren't in the industry any longer. There were people that I didn't know because they were new in the industry, and there was a lot that had shifted. And well, I'll tell you, I use the word a lot for people, especially as we get into a different age category, that we need to remain relevant. And I felt irrelevant at the time and
So
really
that's
got myself out.
such a powerful place, Don, because so many of the people that I work with, they have challenges staying consistent, right? And I just talked about that, I think last night on a podcast is, what's the downside of taking a month off? Well, it's restarting at the end of the month, because a month can turn into 4 weeks, can turn into 5 weeks, into 6 weeks, 7 weeks. It's a slippery slope, right? How do you
Yes.
reboot? And you added to that interesting loss of confidence, that starting to doubt yourself and your relevance. How did you pull up out of that dive? What specifically did you do?
Well, a lot of it was getting around people that I, knew that were in that place. I mean, I, reconnected. I can't tell you what that was exactly, but reconnected with Tony, reconnected with people that I knew from that era. Just got around people that started the conversation, really dug into reading again. Reading has been just a huge part of my life. And back in the early days, the Rohn days, I took a speed reading course. I was just pouring through books, right? And so, books were always a great place to get re-inspired. I was talking yesterday, you would appreciate this, I'm sure you remember it, little teeny book about this big called As a Man Thinketh.
Oh, sure.
And
I used to hundreds of them I gave out. Right?
Exactly, me too. And I used to carry it in my pocket and just open it. And what, it's that thing that I used to have people tell me the Bible was like that. Open the Bible and the passage you read is the one that you needed exactly for that day. And that's how I started doing that. And of course we had, the internet was going and we started to have YouTube, but I don't know if YouTube was, but videos were beginning to get popular. So I just poured myself into personal development and poured myself back into people. And you and I both know how powerful association is. And that's a huge part of what pulled me out.
Yeah. Okay. Super smart. So the flip side of that question, without using that particular answer, just look at your whole career.
Yeah.
What's the smartest thing you've ever done?
Wow. You could have prepped me for that one. I might have had some thoughts about it. Smartest thing I ever did.
Could be a habit.
I'm going to win big points here in just a second. I'm going to win big points on this, okay? Getting involved with Allison and creating the life that we've created. I'm going to say that. And you gave me the shot. I had to take it, all right?
Is she back there somewhere?
She is not. She's in her office upstairs. Her office is right above me here. She'll see this when the time is right.
Well, I believe that that's a valid answer because I get it. So tell us why. What was created in that union that made you so much better than you were?
Allison is brilliant. I've worked around brilliance. I've never been brilliant. I've worked around brilliance, and I've had the good fortune to wrangle brilliance. But she's really super smart. She gets connection to a lot of things. She connects dots most people don't see, and she has kept me relevant. She has forced me to continue to stay up with the things that I know I should be doing, and yet she's the one that's really helped me do that. Technology. I mean, you saw her run down before we were having little technical challenges, and guess who was here? Bam, my producer, right? My director. And she's a great businesswoman. She's got a real estate organization now, 750 people. She's dynamic. She's beautiful. I mean, just so many things that are her assets that have really, she's given to me. And so, again, I say that out of all kindness, and I know she'll appreciate that. But it's really true. And I think that she also gets how to put people together, and that's, I've had good people around me who did that for me. I'm a great culturizer. I'm a great, keeper of culture, but I'm not a great creator necessarily of that. And she is a good one for making that happen.
Well, I'll tell you my observations, Don. What you have been brilliant at your whole career is seeking out, consciously or unconsciously, and creating enough value for very powerful, very successful people that they wanted you in their inner circle. They wanted you to be their right hand. They wanted you to be a trusted advisor and partner. And what an extraordinary gift that is, ending up with the most pivotal one being Allison. So
How fun is that?
That's super smart. All right, last question. Last question is, I want you to imagine that you're talking now to somebody listening to this podcast. Most of the people that listen to my podcast, I believe, are stuck or struggling. And I think that's just the general demographic of up and coming entrepreneurs, is they spend most of their time stuck or struggling. And congratulations if you're one of those stuck or struggling entrepreneurs that you're listening to this podcast, because that means you're not out, right? You're not dead and gone. You're still in it. And you're doing what Don talked about earlier. How do you pull up out of a dive? Well, just dive in to input, right? Dive into somebody that can inspire you. But I think most of the people listening to this podcast could use a breakthrough. They could use a thump on their bowl. They could use something that, because we look at our careers, it's always boom, the lights come on. We just see something in a different way based on something somebody said, and all of a sudden we're off and running. So imagine you're talking to just one person somewhere in the world. They could be anywhere, right? Anywhere in 200 countries, 192 time zones, or however many there are. And they're struggling or they're stuck, but they really want it, and they're willing to work, and they're listening to this. And you got 3 things to tell them. And only 3.
Wow.
What's the first one that comes to mind?
The first one is the cliche is what you think about comes about, but it's having to do with attitude. And I truly believe, and I'm not sure where I got this from, but I believe that attitude is the filter through which everything comes. And good and bad, the best and the worst are always present. And our filter is, am I looking at what works, what can work, what possible? Am I looking at what can't work, what isn't happening, what's not possible, right? And so that is a big piece of success. You've got to get your mind in the right place. And for that reason, the exposure, the reading, the being around the right people, all of that is a huge part of influencing how we think. So I believe that's number 1.
2. So if one is, all right, you're listening to this podcast, you're awesome. You're on the right track. Keep listening. Listen to it again. Listen to more. Read some books. Get around some people that inspire you with that can-do attitude. That's 1. Let's assume I'm doing that.
Read Success Magazine. That'd be a good start. I'll put in a little plug. Read Success Magazine.
Subscribe to Success Magazine. What's 2?
2 is understand the value of your time. Understand that God put us here and gave us all equal amounts of that particular resource. And that in time, everything happens. Through time, everything happens. And your choices and decisions that you're making are daily, and actually not even daily, they're hour by hour, and truthfully, minute by minute. And in our social media ridden world, you can lose 15, 20 minutes in a heartbeat. By the way, watching other people's highlight reel, thinking less of yourself and letting your attitude go backwards, right? I mean, it's like there's so many things that we've got to do, but I will tell you, it all happens in time. And I think that to understand, we need to say to know more often, to be more discerning with what we do and don't do, and really put our time and attention into the things that really matter to yourself and to your family. The things, if you've committed to your family, man, then what are you going to do to make that commitment come true?
Yeah, it's like if people just spent 15 minutes a day that they might spend on social media comparing themselves to other people and getting depressed in the process, if they just spent that 15 minutes in a massive action step, right? Make a phone call, send a text, right? Read 15 minutes of a book. I mean, there's a big swing right there from depression to inspiration in 15 minutes. All right, the last thing. So we're going to stay in personal development. We're going to pay very close attention to how we spend our time. And if this is the last thing you ever get to tell me, Don Hobbs, I'm a struggling entrepreneur. I have big dreams. I have a big desire. I'm willing to work. I'm leaning in. You've told me stay in personal development, manage my time. The last thing you ever get to tell me that makes or breaks me as an entrepreneur is what?
You're way bigger and better and more important than you ever imagined. That your beliefs may not be there yet, but you have to know that God put you here for a reason that's far bigger than you can even imagine. And that you have to honor that piece. You have to look at who you really are, not who you think you are, not the one you defend, not the way that your family told you, not the one that that's come out through various, activities and the failures. The belief system has to come back to God put me here and made us in his likeness and gave us everything and intended for us to have greatness and opulence and abundance and all of that, and anything short of that is a crime. There's a piece, Richard, and I'm sure you have seen it many times, but I've ended many of my talks with Marianne Williamson's Our Deepest Fear.
Yeah.
And I think, when you're right, and it has to do with, our deepest fear is not we are inadequate. It's that we're powerful beyond measure. It's playing small. It doesn't serve us, right? And the thing about it is, in my world, for all these years of personal development, what I also come to realize is we owe it to everybody around us to be the best we can be, because we are. Rohn used to say we're either operating as a warning or an example or a warning, right? And you're either going to be, but either way, you're being watched. People are going, oh, see, it's okay if we screw around and do whatever. Oh, or wow, look at that. It's impressive. It's aspirational to watch that man operate. And you've been an inspiration to people like that. And I guarantee it. That's why this podcast and all the things that you've done have been so successful. But I'm telling you, when they start to realize, when anybody realizes who they really are and starts stripping away the layers of stuff that people have and the beliefs that we've begun to, and all those things just get stripped back and you get to the core. Oh my God, you're amazing. So
yeah, and that is especially a poignant distinction for people of faith to to not adopt that attitude that you're talking about, Don, would be to believe that our Creator is capricious in their nature to give us the ambition to dream and have a desire, but not give us the capability to achieve it, would be mockery. And that goes against everything that people believe. So believe in yourself. Don Hobbs, I believe in you. I believe in Success Magazine. I am so excited for your stewardship of Success Magazine. And I'm so honored that you spent almost an hour with my audience telling your story of how you've gone from those magic creative moments of bringing teams of magnificent people together to go impact. I mean, your impact around the world, Don, in your career is, it's in the hundreds of millions of people. It has to be. Because you have people that you've coached that are now coaching, and they're ambassadors, they're speakers, they're authors, and that's that beautiful ripple effect, right? So, my friend Mike Green is, he's a product of your work, and he's out there, sharing it with other people, and so you're the gift on giving, Don Hobbs.
Richard, thank you. I'm humbled by what you just said. I'm really honored that you give me an hour of your time with these fine folks. And I hope that you continue to touch the lives of so many as you have. I'll make a deal with you. Let's keep doing this.
I love it. Hey, everybody, go subscribe to Success Magazine. That magazine's been changing lives for 120 years, and I think it's about ready to get reinvented into the most important periodical that any of us could be studying. Thank you, Don Hobbs. Thank you, Authentic Networkers. We'll see you next time. This is Richard Bliss Brooke telling you again, the work is worth it.